Welcome to today's meeting of the External Services Select Committee at the London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to monitor services provided by external organisations within its remit and review their performance. We also undertake in-depth reviews and witness sessions on specific topics and then make recommendations and submit our findings to the decision-making cabinet. My name is Councillor Nick Denys and I am chairman of this committee. Before we start, I have some important housekeeping for everyone present. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow Nikki out of the building. Please keep your microphones muted when you aren't speaking and then unmute to speak. Even though we can all hear each other in the room on the YouTube channel, they won't be able to hear you if your microphone's not on, so that's why we do that. And as chairman, I'll call on those to speak, so if you want to speak, just raise your hands and I'll bring you in to speak. Okay, so we're going to move on to the agenda. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillor Simon Arnold and Councillor Peter Money, and Scott Farley is here as his substitute.
Welcome, Scott. Okay, are there any declarations of interest in matters before this meeting? No? Fantastic. Okay, so all of this is in public, am I right, Nikki? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we're on to the minutes. Does anybody have any comment on the accuracy of the minutes? Are we all happy with the minutes? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so that's agreed. Excellent. So now we move on to item 5, which is this month we're looking at the Safer Hillingdon Partnership Performance Monitoring. So in plain English, that is issues to do with policing, the fire service, and what might be called antisocial behaviour. So we essentially have 3 different groups of people who are going to be speaking to us tonight. We have the fire service, we have licensing, and we have the police. So I'm going to go with of order of asking the fire service to speak first, then we'll do Q&As, then licensing Q&A, then the police Q&A. So hopefully that will all be simple. So over to the fire service. Glenn Nicolaides, please put your mic on and tell us all about yourself. Sorry.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name's Glenn Nicolaides, Station Commander for Hillingdon Fire Station. There are 3 Station Commanders in Hillingdon and 1 Borough Commander, which is Alan Taylor. I predominantly cover the area of Uxbridge Road, and then we've got Heathrow Fire Station. We've also got Hayes Fire Station, which has specialist appliances. Hillingdon have 2 appliances at the station on Uxbridge Road, and then we've got Ruislip Fire Station as well, with some special appliances there as well. Just to give you an overview of our resources. You'll be pleased to know we've recently got a 64-metre ladder from the Grenfell Inquiry. We've got one of them based in the Hillingdon Borough, so the residents will be pleased to know that. And also we've got quite a lot of other specialist appliances as well. We've got hose layer units, which are for incidents where we haven't got enough water and we can go long distances. That's just an overview of that. So I'll start off by just telling you about how the fire service has changed over the last couple of years. I think you'd like to know that. So we went, about 10 years ago, we went into doing free home fire safety visits, which is basically a 10 tick box checklist we go through for residents, any resident really, doesn't matter what building they're in. All they need to do is they need to approach us. So that would be, they would call the fire brigade on a free phone number which is on the side of the fire engine, go on the internet, or be referred to by yourselves, or we go and approach them. We can't just knock on their door, only if there is a risk to that area, i.e. there's been a fire in the immediate vicinity, or they are what we call a P1 person. So we may focus those areas. So what we do is we do this checklist, and if required, we would fit a free smoke alarm. Most properties these days, as you know, because of legislation, will have a smoke alarm installed, but those who have been in their premises for a long time may not have one still. So what we would do is test their smoke alarm for them to help them, and if we need one, we would fit one in the correct location. So that's what we do now. In the last couple of years, we do a new service which is actually brand new this year. We've got one where we would go to businesses. So we do a similar service, give advice and support and guidance, but now to businesses. And we would do them at a simple premises. So we have our regulation responsibilities under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, which an inspecting officer will do. However, now firefighters will go into small premises, sometimes unannounced, and they will just simply walk around there and they will identify whether they've had a risk assessment, a proper one. If they haven't, they would refer it to our regulatory side of the fire brigade. So basically, if you can think about it, it's an area we may not have gone to before. A simple premises could be like, for instance, a laundrette or an off licence, where we may not normally go because we don't get many fires there really. They're normally in dwellings, or large businesses which have key holders. So what we do now is get them, because they're areas where we hadn't been before, estate agents, stuff like that, and then we refer them forward. So don't be surprised if you get a visit from a firefighter and they look with a different hat these days. So that's a new thing. So we're training our staff now at all levels in fire safety regulation, which is new in London. Another thing you'll be pleased to know is we have had a downward trend in the amount of fires that we've had. I mean, that's just the built environment in general. It's awareness because of current events. And when we do have events now, people seem to do it over social media more, referring stuff. So one of the things that I'd like to promote is maybe ask residents to call us rather than tweet about us or put something on their social media page. There seems to be an assumption lately that people call the fire brigade and actually the first person that normally sees it is the person that's telling their friend. So that's something else I'd like to promote. The downward trend has mainly been around fires. We've gone down quite a lot actually. We're just over 500 fire calls in Hillingdon this year. It was over 700 plus in 2018. So it's gone down quite a lot, as you can imagine, and that's due to a lot of prevention work that we've been doing. The way we work in Hillingdon with our prevention work is because there is no specific area of high risk, which the residents will be pleased to know, it's actually throughout the geographical location, it's pretty much the same. So we don't get a spike in a certain area. There are trends, but when you look over a 5-year statistics, they're actually not trends. They're only peaks for a short period of time. So what we do is we actually have got geographical locations within the borough that a certain watch will take ownership of, and they will then focus on that area. Once they've done that, they'll start at the beginning again. So what we try to do is look at the whole area of Hillingdon and go down every street, every house, and see if we can do what we call a visual audit that will maybe turn into an inspection, home fire safety check, or a fire safety check by the fire crews. So we look at that sort of thing. We've had a lot of interest in our high reach appliance, as you can imagine. All those areas which we deemed as high risk, which is the taller buildings, and that's not because those specific buildings are high risk, it's they're politically high risk. So we do regular visits to them, so the public can also be rest assured that the fire brigade are fully aware of all the buildings that are high risk. And I won't go into detail where they are because that's not important. It's all you need to know is we are fully aware of where those buildings are. And we do regular visits. In fact, some of them we go 4 times a year, periodically, just to make sure that the owners of those buildings are keeping on top and making sure the mitigating measures are maintained in place. So that's what we're doing most recently. On the fallout of the pandemic, obviously we couldn't have members of public at our fire stations. That's been quite frustrating actually, because it's one of the things that we really enjoy. And we've not been able to do that, but we're planning an open day in May. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't have another event where we have to cancel it. And we regularly have, around the festive period, we have a tea party and things like that for the elderly. So hopefully we'll bring them all back. We're starting to open our doors up again to the public, so please check our Twitter page and stuff to see what's happening there. And we've been in regular contact with our mayor, who I think is amazing, and we've built a really good relationship with them. He's recently come down and seen our cadets, brought us a lovely cake. That was lovely, and they were really impressed with that. And we've also seen the councillor came down, and I believe he went up on our turntable ladder after a bit of persuasion, which I think he enjoyed. So yeah, that's a bit of a background. Like I said, I do apologise that we couldn't get out in the pandemic to the public, but I think we all felt that pain, but now we're starting to get them through our big red doors, and we'll be going out to more of them people. So the thing that I would like to say finally, just as my sort of pitch, is that if you haven't had a home fire safety visit and you've asked for one and it's been a few months, the reason is we're focusing on the most high vulnerable people, because we want to limit the amount of exposure that firefighters have and vice versa with the public. So at the moment we're sort of filtering those people, and we've got about 800 backlog through London, through the northwest area alone. So we're going through that now. So if you are at high risk, don't worry, we'll see you within a week. However, if it's a general home fire safety visit you want, and there's no referral from either from social housing or from a carer, then we wouldn't really see you unless it would be further down that line, and that's simply because we're trying to limit the amount of exposure we've been having through the pandemic. But that's slowly starting to come back to normality now. That's it.
Thanks very much, Glenn. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'll open it to other councillors if they wish to ask questions as well. My first question is around sort of capacity, I suppose, because it's great news that fires are going down in general, and I imagine there's lots of more awareness about fire prevention, plus equipment's getting a lot better, I think. So the random fires that happen in homes, I think, tend to be happening less. But of course we do still have fires, and certainly big fires that appear every now and again. We recently had one in Uxbridge, where the I think it was a TV studio or something, and I just wondered, obviously when those big fires happen, they're very, very important and cause lots of damage, so we need to be ready for those massive fires. But at the same time, if there are less fires in a general week, how are we able to make sure that we have capacity for those, big flash events when they happen?
So the way, I won't go into too technical, but we have a modelling system now which is reviewed at a corporate level now of the whole of London and where the resources are best suited with the budget that we get. What I would say is just because an incident has a lot of resources now, it may not be always because we need the firefighters. It may be simply because, and in that specific case that you're talking about, it was to get the water from a certain area to the incident. So we needed fire engines to be able to pump from one to the other, and that's, so it isn't always because we need the people. So one of the things in London which we can be quite proud of is we've got lots of resources. Certain incidents that happen in London, if they were in the outskirts of the country, you may not have that privilege. So I would say, actually we've got quite a lot of resources, and it's really in our gift to be able to utilise them as best as possible. We always learn from incidents, and we always review what we call the predetermined attendance, our PDA. So on this particular incident and every other incident, including the high-risk buildings, we put in place certain procedures which is it automatically goes on every frontline appliance, fire engine, and that will tell anyone. So if a fire engine comes from another area, because one maybe doesn't work, they will have exactly the same information as your local fire crew. So we're fully prepared. One thing that we focus on more than anything is the resources for putting fires out, because obviously that's our job. I've been doing this for 22 years and I've never seen an issue regarding attendances.
Is that basically, obviously different areas within London will support each other on those moments? So for example, if we needed help in Hillingdon and the Ealing Fire Service were quiet, they would is that how you'd sort of flex things in order to make sure that things were covered?
So we've got predetermined attendance. We will try our absolute best. I think we hit it most of the time. 6 minutes we get a fire engine at any place in London, and then so that is there's no, just because you maybe live in Pimlico or you live in Hillingdon, you'll still get the same amount of resources. And also, what people don't usually know is if you live right on the border, some people get a bit concerned thinking, I live on the last road of Hillingdon. Actually, we've got a memorandum of understanding that the other brigade, Surrey or Berkshire, will give us that extra resource. So they get, although we could get them from London, because it would be quicker, we'll get them from the neighbouring brigade because that's right on the border. So it's a very good system that we've got in place. And I believe Hillingdon for many years hasn't had any resources removed, and I don't think in the future That would be the very, very, very last resort.
That's fantastic to hear. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, Hina.
Thank you, Glenn. Can you just expand a bit more on how exactly you're prioritising who gets their home fire safety visits, please?
Yes, so we've got at Wembley is our area hub, and what they do is we've got a team up there which filter out. So when all the calls come in, even to the local fire station. So if I get a call at my fire station, it will be sent to this area team, and then they will look at that list. They will look at who the person is, if there is care plans in place, if they've got a certain care package system. What sort of vulnerabilities they've got, if they're known to us as well. We also share with all partners. I'm on the actual committee, on the joint partnership committee with the vulnerable people, so we share through MASH and stuff about that. So we work out who is those vulnerable people. And if we don't know, what we usually do is send a fire appliance around there to check. So especially with things like hoarding is we score it in levels. But those levels are very hard to do if you're talking to someone over the phone. So we usually go down there and get some eyes on, and then we will maybe talk to the individual so we make sure we've got the best referral possible. Because obviously if we just take it over the phone and we don't get all the key information, sometimes we can miss it. So to mitigate that, we'll go and see the property, see the resident, and then talk to local authorities and whoever engages with them, and then make that assessment there.
June.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask then, who does the recommendation for individuals to get the assessment done? Is it through either the social services or the vulnerable people, or is it individuals have to make the recommendation to you or ask for you to come and do that?
So there's a couple of ways. I sort of spoke on it a little bit earlier, but I'll expand. So obviously we can't intrude in people's personal lives. So what we do is they would contact us, and that's done. We do it by basically local advertising through. We've recently had a television advert, which is actually probably the biggest one we do. I've been on a podcast for Uxbridge Radio and did it. So we do it just locally. Like I said, we've got signposts up. We put it on the front of the fire station. We put it everywhere we possibly can. So that's one way. The second way is we do have conversation with CQC registered places and stuff, because they're obviously our highest vulnerable people that we know about, and as part of that we get referrals. Local authority do give referrals to us as well, and private carers, we get referrals of them as well. But we've got a system where we do what we call a quick strike as well, where even in a local area where there has been a number of fires, doesn't have to be related to the property or the type, we would also go in that area because it raises awareness and people take it a little bit more serious when they see a fire down their street. So we usually get a lot of uptake that way as well. I've also recently, there's been quite a few tower blocks, which I believe you guys manage, the local authority manage, which I've been speaking to over Teams meetings, where the residents would have evenings. I'd like to promote that more actually, if your colleagues would like to do that with the local fire station. We've had a lot of engagement, and one thing I have noticed is we've started to get more residents feeling more comfortable in getting their voices heard, and that's basically it's all part of the new Fire Safety Act. We need to engage more with residents, we need to listen more and understand their concerns regarding the built environment. So that's another angle which I'd like to be able to promote home fire safety visits. And like I said, if they've already got a smoke alarm, it doesn't mean that we won't do it. We will still go around there, speak about electrics, candle safety, everything.
Okay, Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your office as well. I have a question about planning in terms of your relationship with planning applications, and whether or not you feel that you're able to give sort of the advice on these applications as much as you would, or whether there's any areas on that which are lacking in your opinion, sort of given Grenfell and whatnot, so not there's any sort of gap there.
So you're lucky because I used to work in that department. So, so I'll try and generalise as much as I can because it is technical sort of aspect to it. So are you on about consultation jobs through what you on about, licensing or planning?
Well, construction of homes and high rises and whatnot.
Okay, so all of our, over the last couple of years, because we get so many, we get thousands actually, and some areas we get more than others. I mean, where I worked before, which was Westminster, we used to get, we called D jobs, we used to get consultation jobs. Sometimes we'd have a stack that high in 1 week, and they're usually always at the beginning of the year. But however, in other areas, like Bromley for instance, you wouldn't get as many because there's not as much of a built environment. So we've identified that, where the resources weren't in the right place, and we've now, you'll be pleased to know, got a centralised hub where special trained officers will go up there and they will do those plans regardless of where they come in the country, in London. So they will come in and they will do them. So as and when they come, so the turnaround time is better now. Regarding your question about did you say do I see any concerns of it? What did you say?
Well, so any sort of gap, if you feel that you're able to give enough advice, or there's anything that's sort of maybe out of scope that you thought should be in scope. Right.
Okay. Yeah. So, like I said, we've got a really good system now, and we go through flow charts, and we do licensing, we do planning applications, and we do like the changes of use applications all separately now. I think what we've got in place is a good system. So what we do is they come into us, we review the application form. If we're going to comment on it, then we usually actually go and see the premises, because and that would go to an inspecting officer, and they'll probably get an inspection out of it. So they will go down there and see it at the earliest stage they can. Prevention's better than reaction, so we wouldn't want to go to a place that's already been built once they've spent all the money. The project has already invested all the money in it. It's obviously more difficult to get it retrospectively fixed. So we try to get there. Obviously, there is a delay in getting that done because the inspecting officers have got quite a large workload. So what they do is they just prioritise which ones they go to. Obviously, ones in more dense locations, ones with a history of issues would go to first. And then we would filter it down that way. But what we normally do is consult. If we have no issues, then we would not go to the building usually. If we do have any issues, we'll probably go down there and see it as well. And sometimes we have a meeting with the individual as well to talk about it. So a lot of it's to do with an understanding of the project, I think, rather than rejecting. Rejecting is normally already done before it gets to us, actually, by the local building control on most occasions.
Thank you. Sort of following on to what's been said previously, with the smoke alarms that are fitted, I understand, I might be wrong with this, isn't there some sort of legislation about how you should have in a property by number of rooms? Because I think when I had some fitted a few years ago, I had to have one in the living room. It's just a flat, but I had one in the living room, one in the hallway, one in, and so on and so forth. And also with carbon monoxide alarms, I know you give those out for free, or were doing that.
Yeah, so I don't. We did have some, and they were for landlords. We had quite a few thousands of them actually, and it was just given as a one big lump. I don't know if I don't know for certain if we still have them. I do know, I think it was 2018, about October time, I think the law changed, legislation changed, but that was regarding rented accommodation, I believe. So existing rented accommodation, I believe you've got to have, for every solid fuel appliance area, you need to have a carbon monoxide, which, funny enough, I think it means things like open fires and stuff. And I believe then you should have smoke alarms in there as well. That was for landlords. I think new built properties, I believe that they have to have a hardwired smoke alarm in them. But existing buildings, I don't think the law's changed on just dwellings, freehold.
Actually, I went to a community safety day that Jackie organised, and she gave me a free carbon monoxide. So there are still some knocking around. Okay, sorry. Maybe I got the last one. Okay, right. I think that's all our questions. Yep. So thanks very much, Glenn, for coming along. You're welcome to stay, but you're also very welcome to leave as well. Up to you. No, you're not required to stay or leave. So no, definitely. We're going to move on to other things, but you are welcome to stay if you wish to. But some people do sometimes. But you don't have to if you don't want to. Okay. So we're going to move on to licensing next. Thank you very much. So here from licensing, or to talk about licensing, we have Stephanie Waterford, who's our Head of Trading Standards, Environmental Health, Licensing, and ASBET, London Borough of Hillingdon. Then we have Dan, is it Ferreira? Brilliant, fantastic. Licensing Team Manager, I like that, London Borough of Hillingdon. And then we have Sergeant Graham Edwards, the Tri-Borough Licensing Sergeant, Metropolitan Police Service. So thank you, all three of you, for being here. I don't mind what order and how you want to speak. Is there?
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, Committee.
Sorry, I missed David Butler, sorry. And Penny Brown, I'm so sorry. Nikki's fantastic, by the way. Without her, this meeting would be an absolute shambles. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, so anyway, Dan, if you want to start, then we can go on.
Cool, thank you. Good evening, Councillor Denys. You'll be familiar of the licensing process, and I believe Councillor Davis will be as well. I can see on the agenda pack, page 10, that really we're talking about crime and disorder relating to licensed premises, so I won't bore you with the processes, but try and make this talk, if you like, specific to crime and disorder and licensed premises, funnily enough. And I intend to cover that by looking at the roles for our department, but also the collaboration with our main partner, the police, the challenges we face, and also a couple of case studies. But I try not to stray too much into what the police are going to say, so I'm going to sort of half predict. But in terms of licensed premises, crime and disorder, we're really talking about the Licensing Act 2003, as you know. And the framework is in our licensing policy, which is, if you like, the flesh of the bones from the Licensing Act and indeed the guidance. And really, the framework is stated there purely in one of the sections, partnership working and initiatives. And it says there that the licensing authority encourages work between the licensing authority and our partners. And not only that, there's also a duty on the licensing authority to work with our partners. And in practice, I say that's what we do. So what is the role of the licensing team? I can say for us, under the Licensing Act, it is a responsible authority. You'll be familiar with the term. Essentially, that means any application coming in, we can put a representation or objection to it. Equally, we can put in a review of that application if it is a problematic premises, and indeed the fire brigade are also a responsible authority too. So those are our roles in terms of licensed premises. And also, I suppose when we're talking about our roles, not only we deal with the application process for new applications, variations, changes of license holders, but we're also talking about the enforcement, and I know that's something that we've moved on to the last few years, not just dealing with the applications coming in and putting them forward to the subcommittee. We're also talking about how we check compliance with those conditions, how we correct those measures where there's problems associated with licensed premises. So the core of the talk, if you like, and I'll be quite brief in my list, is how do we practically work? That's what we're talking about here with our colleagues. And I've come up with a few things. And like the gentleman said with the fire brigade, it is prevention. And we see that in the actual application process itself. So when a new application comes in, or a variation, ourselves and licensing and police will put in representations where we have concerns. So, for example, if the premises is going beyond a late time, say 4 in the morning, we will put in a representation because of concerns of crime and disorder, but also public nuisance as well. Also, if we look at an application, we feel like it doesn't go far enough in terms of crime and disorder. So, for example, CCTV, incident logs, SIA door staff, we will put in a representation. So, over time, what you'll find, each case on its merits, step by step, we are creating, if you like, a framework of the different types of licensed premises that will be in our borough. And that's a whole sort of partnership working, because not only are we working with our colleagues at the police, we're also working with the residents as well. And we leave that up to the councillors of the subcommittee, which you were on, and indeed Councillor Davis on, to make those appropriate decisions. So that's prevention. But there's also, admittedly, a reactive approach that we have. And we have a very good, and I'm not just saying it because they're sitting right next to me, we have an excellent relationship which stems well before my time. I've only been here 2.5 years, but those things were inherent with the manager before me, if you like. And so it's so comfortable that if there are any issues in terms of over the weekend, there is this direct relationship where they're quite happy to take our calls and vice versa. And that was mostly evident in the COVID restrictions times as well, where it was all going sort of crazy. But we were involved in these joint forums, and not just Hillingdon, but with Hounslow and with Ealing, talking about the crime and disorder and all the issues that we were having in relation to these restrictions, which we were trying to check on. Also, I would like to say there's a good collaboration in terms of the sharing of intelligence. Again, an excellent relationship. And they're really based on the individual relationships which are built over time, and having that mutual trust and respect, that there's transparency in between what we say and there's a trust in what we do. The practical side of collaboration is the joint visits. Graham's team are always more than happy for us to sort of connect with them, and that includes nighttime economy visits as well, where they've and during COVID they had a COVID card going out, so if we had any complaints, they were ensuring not only our borough was covered but our two neighbouring boroughs as well. And I suppose the last way we collaborate, if you like, is in open forums. So Pub Watch is the most popular, if you like. So held by the trade themselves, also BID are there as well. We lend our advice, education, along with the police, so we get a consistent and transparent approach. So there's no inconsistencies, if you like. And if we assess that relationship, collaboration, there's obviously some positives and some challenges, and I'll be quite open about them, if you like. The positives, as I've stated, a long-standing relationship built on trust and respect, and I think that's only getting better. We seem to be finding a groove after COVID with the personnel that we have in the team, and indeed with police licensing. As I said, there's a consistency and transparency in our approach, and also I would say there's an excellent standard in what we do. You would have seen in our subcommittees how professionally we take it, and indeed our partners do. And that's reflected in how we conduct ourselves in terms of the escalation process and the enforcement policy and the enforcement concordat. There's always working with these businesses, and as that last result, putting in things like reviews or expedited reviews. But it's also always about reasonableness and proportionality. The flip side is obviously the challenges. It's resources, if you like. Not so much on our side. Licensing Act is a small area of our roles and responsibilities. We've also got gambling, street trading, sergeant special treatment, and animal licensing and animal welfare. And I won't speak for the police, but I know there's 3 of them, and they cover 3 areas, and they do an amazing job, and we're happy to sort of like work with them. There's also challenges in terms of what I certainly feel, and sometimes the pressure. There's stuff which is beyond our control, and that is caught by sort of social media, and how we control that. And we work, and it's definitely got better. Work closely with our comms team to get the right result. And it's also not being leaned into it politically as well in making decisions. It's evidence-based, and I know, not mention specific cases where the police have been quite firm in their approach, and we've had that discussion, and in the end it has worked out in the right way, and we respect their experience for that. There's also the expectations, well, that can be a challenge in the licensing forum. Licensing are normally sort of like caught in the middle, because you'll get representations from a resident, you'll get the trade saying as well, and we're sitting this fine line. But I'd like to think we get off that fence sometimes and we make that decision. But again, it's evidence-based, and sometimes that doesn't please everyone, but that's what we have to do to do our role. I'd like to sort of like end on our case studies. I've got a couple. I'm not going to mention the principal because that's really was sort of spearheaded by the police, and I'm sure they'll sort of touch on that. But we can talk about one, which is the Hunter's Lounge application, which was quite an interesting one, and it shows collaboration. It's the perfect example. So in April of last year, the licensing authority, one of my colleagues, reviewed the premises license, and this was because of non-compliance across the board, not only crime and disorder, but also public safety and prevention of public nuisance. And the issues were quite wide-ranging. For instance, they were breaching Health Act smoke-free regulations, in that it was a shisha premises, and so the outside area was not compliant with the Health Act. There was also COVID breaches during the time. I believe it was the 10 o'clock curfew. They were trading beyond those times. Also, in terms of licensing, they're providing unlicensed regulated entertainment, which was causing issues for residents close by, so we had an ASBIT input as well. Also, the police gave us their information in terms of the crime and disorder that had been happening, and also information about the individual who they were concerned with. And so that all went to a licensing subcommittee, and the subcommittee agreed with our recommendation to revoke the premises licence. And so that was about to go to appeal, but through the hard work of the different agencies and our legal team, and they dropped their appeal, and so that was quite a success for us. But that's just one case that we've sort of dealt with. Hopefully that shows some of the work that we're doing on the higher scale. And in conclusion, that's what we do in terms of partnership work in crime and disorder with the police. I'm happy to take any questions if you wish, Chair.
If it's okay, can we, Sergeant Edwards, could you do your sort of chat now, because and then we'll take questions about the licensing as a whole. So thank you, Dan.
Of course, thank you. It's quite good to follow Dan, because he always covers plenty of the things which I think I was going to do. Sometimes good, but as I said, some of the things we covered. What I'll do initially is if I could give you an idea of the makeup of how the police licensing team is split across the BCU, and then move on to a little bit more of our role descriptions and what we do throughout our daily duties. Touch on a bit on enforcement, and then conclude, just talk to you a little bit about the multi-agency work we do. And then, of course, my colleagues here will be able to cover any specifics if there's anything involving which historic cases that you may want to discuss, and we'll certainly try to answer those questions the best we can. So essentially, the police licensing team, the role of the police licensing team is to effectively and professionally enforce the Licensing Act 2003. So the makeup of the team, as you're all no doubt aware, the MPS went through a restructure into a BCU sector units where the licensing team was split across the three boroughs of Hillingdon, Hounslow and Ealing. The makeup of how that has worked is a sergeant, essentially myself, manages the BCU of those three boroughs, and you have two police constable licensing officers within each sector, two of which for your sector sitting next to me now, and obviously the same applies for Hounslow and Ealing. The licensing officers ourselves, we are governed, for want of a better word, by the central licensing team, who are based centrally, and I wouldn't propose to use the word answer, but we are governed by them. So the processes that we adopt and the reviews that enforcement we subsequently take does have that gateway through a central licensing governance, and also the Director of Legal Services, the MPS DLS services, which speaks for itself. So all our enforcement, certainly when it involves court enforcement or through hearings, will go through our legal services team. Moving to a particular role, a daily role really, I should ask my colleagues to really talk about this, because they're the ones that are doing it every day as opposed to me. But on a daily basis, it's the expectations of a police licensing officer to check daily crimes, every incident of crime, every incident of note, every day is checked and triaged, really. And this is entered onto our in-house licensing information portal system. LIPS is what we call it within the MPS. Now, this system has all incidents, all interactions, all notable interactions, really, recorded within this. And that is what essentially builds our evidence picture when we deal with enforcement, because, of course, if we're dealing with enforcement, as the 182 section, Home Office 182 guidance always stipulates, is the MPS and our responsible authority colleagues, we deal with a stepped approach to enforcement, and this is built upon the MPS model of the 4 E's, which is early intervention, evidence gathering, enforcement and evaluation. So the key to this is the police licensing team will pick up on an issue, potential problem, and the key issue here is early intervention. We pick up on this early. We interact early, and that be through visits, in any way communication, get in there early, try and work with the trade. And what we're all trying to achieve ultimately is compliance. And compliance doesn't have to always be through enforcement. If we get to the end result through interactions, through less of a legal process, really, it's better for all of us. Ultimately, we need to get to that end result. So it's early intervention. We gather our evidence, we build that picture, we do a stepped approach, and it really is only at the last stage, the enforcement stage. Well, actually, that's the penultimate stage, enforcement. But I think you understand my point. No review should really be a surprise. This should be a stepped approach throughout enforcement to when we actually get to that point where we can't really do any more. We've tried, we've worked through, we've set action plans, and we're at that point where we have to issue enforcement. And of course, that does occur, and we have one running actually currently now, not within this sector. You'll be pleased to hear. And the final process of that enforcement 4E method is the evaluation. We go back, we continue to support, and we try to maintain compliance. And unfortunately, if that isn't able to be done and licences are revoked, then of course an application can always come back in, and that process effectively can start again. So that's a little bit of idea about the. Daniel's already touched upon the daily basis, what the amount of work that does come in through not just the licensing authority. It's served upon the police, whether it be licensing application, temporary event notices, new premises licence applications, full minor variations, interim authority notices, DPS variations, and new personal licence applications. It's an extensive list, and these come in. A lot of these are governed by statutory timeframes, so they have to be dealt within statutory timeframes, and that does place some degree of pressure, but certainly when you have 2 licensed officers, as good as they are, covering a large area. Another side of our role is to attend, and certainly for myself, is to attend safety advisory groups in relations to any large-scale proposed events that are coming to the sector. It has been, for obvious reasons, the last couple of years, but these events have not been occurring. But certainly we're starting to see these filter through now, and we're starting to see more events coming in, which is pleasing to see. But in line with that, the safety advisory groups are set up, which licensing are an integral part of, because many of these events have licensable activities that they want to apply for. Some of the partnership work that we undertake, I have to say, and I would say this, but we have an excellent relationship with Hillingdon Local Authority. The officers, certainly PC Butler, has been in place longer than I have, but the relationships, I hope you've heard, and it's kind words from Daniel, but I do believe and we do actually have good relationships with all our local authorities. I predominantly have been Ealing for quite a few years, where we continue to be co-located, embedded within the council, amongst other responsible authorities, on one floor, as you say, with our trading standards teams, our food hygiene teams, our whoever it may be, we're there together, and that did enable that to foster a great relationship that we've enjoyed for quite a few years at Ealing, but as I say, equally here at Hillingdon. And that covers some of the multi-agency work that we've been doing with our trade and standards colleagues, with our licence enforcement colleagues, whether it be test purchases, cadet work, and please feel free to chip in if I've missed some of the things you've done recently. But I know certainly that that work is being undertaken, and we're getting some excellent results. I think, hopefully, that gives you a bit of a flavour of what we do. I'm sure I could go on quite a bit more, but maybe it'd be better if I could welcome some questions and we could answer it that way.
Thank you, and I think that's a really great idea. And essentially, we'll ask questions. They might be direct or they might be general. So if you want to answer them, just put your hands up. So I'll ask a couple, but then I'll come to council colleagues in a second. My first question is about speed, because ultimately, from I suppose our perspective as councillors, the important thing for us is that where issues are highlighted, they get dealt with as quick as possible. But again, you have to balance that against the sort of, as you talked about, the opportunity to improve, and also, we're talking about people's livelihoods here at the same time. So there is that balance which Dan touched upon. So I just wondered, do you think that we're able to deal with matters as quickly as we should? And to complicate my question further, which is always dangerous, but I mean, I see obviously there's the obvious serious incident that happens in the venue, something really serious, criminal, severe injury. Then you can deal. I've seen that happen. Things dealt with very quickly. But it's those grayer areas where just for an example, maybe there are accusations of selling alcohol or cigarettes to underage kids, and a lot of underage kids are hanging around areas causing wider antisocial behaviour, but you don't know if that's the case or not, and obviously the person in the shop is denying it, but the residents want this sorted out as soon as possible. So in one of those more complicated situations, can you talk to me about how you might work together to try and get the quickest possible solution? And I've opened it up. Yes, Stephanie.
I'll take that one. We would very much deal with police colleagues, and for an example, as you described, with underage sales, for example, there's a number of things we could do. We could organise test purchasing, and we would work with colleagues across the police and trading standards to arrange that. You asked about kind of dealing with things quickly, and we do have to, whilst there is a desire to solve the problem instantly, we do have to bear in mind proportionality. So what is a proportionate response? What is reasonable for us to actually do with enforcement? As you know yourself from your licensing experience, things don't happen very quickly because of the statutory procedures, etc., that we have to go through. With licensing, in order to bring a review, for example, in front of you, and that may be on underage sales or low-level ASB, the case would have to be very, very significant in order for that premises to lose its licence. So it would have had to have made a number of failures on a test purchase, or it would have had to have been proven that it was the source of a lot of disorder, antisocial behaviour, additional problems for that licence to be removed. And then, you have to consider, well, even if the licence was removed, would that actually deal with the problem? So the officers actually dealing with the cases will have to make those assessments, and they'll be guided by previous case law, they'll be guided by other intelligence, and that's where you see the recommendations in your licensing subcommittee reports. The officer will often make a recommendation for you to consider as to what they feel is the proportionate response to that licence review. But just speaking outside of licensing, there's a number of other powers that we have as a local authority. So we have powers under ASB legislation. We can do community protection warnings and things like that for ASB and things like that in a local area. So we would always explore if licensing perhaps wasn't going to deliver a viable or quick solution, there are other avenues that we can explore.
Yes.
I think Stephanie's really really well summed that up. But just to almost flip that round is when you talk about the speed element to enforcement. Of course, you've got the standard review that Stephanie talked about, but you've got the other end of the scale when you've got such an incident which is deemed so serious, where the threshold of serious crime or disorder, which is associated, happened either inside or is associated with the premise, and that brings on what is a summary review. So that is maybe, are we able to deal with the speed issue and the element of that, flipping it the other way, as I say? Yes, we are, because the time frames on a summary review are extremely tight. We evidence gather, we follow our 4E model which I spoke about earlier, and we're going to Superintendent Bennett for an application process 48 hours later, and then we'll go into the licensing authority to serve them, and within 3 days there's a review, albeit an interim steps review where we hear this stage, and often these incidents are so serious that it needs that degree of urgency, and we're trying to often suspend a licence, fear of repercussions, avert some risk. So that's an example of when can we deal with rapid and speed applications, and absolutely we can.
What happens if there's a disagreement between you two in terms of what the best proportionate response is? Because even though you work together very closely, and that's great, I'm sure sometimes there are certain risks that one of the council or the police might think are more important than the police or the council think it is. So how do you resolve those sort of...
I think it's happened in the past, to be honest, and I think the guidance is quite clear, so is our policy, that in terms of crime and disorder, the police lead. Simple as that.
Yeah. Daniel's absolutely right. I think the licensing, the primary prosecuting is the police, and in respect of we need to lead, and we do lead when it comes to cases of licensing, with able support from our colleagues, but we will lead.
We also have case law which tells us that the police are the lead authority. So, obviously as professional officers we would respect that and abide by what that case law standard tells us. So we would always look to our police colleagues to be the source of crime and disorder information, and to lead on, and to make those recommendations.
It's nice when things are clear like that, isn't it? And my final question before I go to colleagues is, do we have any statistical evidence around the relationship between ABS and licensing? For example, it being caused by, I don't know, bad shop practices or I mean, anecdotally, of course, if you come back to ward councillors, we know, or when we say we know because we know, even if it's not necessarily provable at the beginning, that maybe certain places are emanating antisocial behaviour because of the characters involved and what they want to do or how they perceive they can make money. But do we collect broader statistics around the relationship between licensing and ABS in any way?
I think the short answer is no, actually, but it's certainly something that we could look to give a bit more analysis to. When you're looking at categorising ASB is very difficult anyway, because ASB can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So our threshold for ASB is very different from a resident's threshold for ASB and what they perceive to be antisocial behaviour or a real issue in their neighbourhood. So it's a very, very difficult thing to actually quantify. But I do think that between us, and I go back to the point made earlier about intelligence sharing, and that's not just with licensing, but it's across trading standards. It's with our own ASB team as well. We do actually share that intelligence, and it may be that anecdotally we know about particular issues or there's a particular hotspot in the borough, so we can respond appropriately. So whilst there is no kind of hard and fast statistics per se, I would say that it's not like we don't know where the issues are, and we don't know where our kind of hotspot premises are. So we generally do have quite a good bank of intelligence between all the different services.
And of course, there's a safe and neighbourhood teams as well who pick up a lot of this stuff as well, in my experience. Yes, Graham. And
of course, very quickly, we've got ASB legislation, licensing legislation. It meets, doesn't it? It meets somewhere in there. So just because a premise isn't a licensed premises, there are ASB legislation, as Stephanie already talked about earlier on, and often this is utilised when we're talking about shisha premises, for instance, and we're talking about ASB closures, criminal behaviour orders, ASB legislation. So that, to answer your question, it does. It links in, and we do use different legislation, obviously, for different offences.
Thank you. June.
This. It might be the sergeant will answer this, or the head of trading standard. You said, I know it's a low impact, but you said there's joint visits to premises in regards to breaches of Licensing Act and breaches where individuals will agree, and the premises owner or the person who running the premises will agree that yes, they will adhere to it. But a lot of them do turn back and literally disagree with it because they constantly keep breaking the law, as we will see it, or residents will see it, by redoing the same act that they were cautioned about. Now, how do you deal with that? Because that's something that we are aware of that's happening regularly with some shops within our high streets and local communities.
Yeah, thank you. I would go back to the stepped approach that we spoke about earlier, and if there is a continual problem, then the response will escalate. So it may be that they've received a visit and they've received a warning, they've been given a chance to improve, perhaps that doesn't happen in the way that we would like, and then our response escalates as long as that non-compliance goes on. So when we're talking about, particularly with licensed premises, if officers do find a problem repeating, there's clearly an issue there, so the sanction needs to be considered to be tougher. I would suggest that that's what's happening.
I hear you on that one, but it doesn't seem to work out that way when caution is given to individual premises, and we are aware that it does happen as much as you've given that caution, and the response that it comes back to us is very slow response in regards to that. There's a continuous perpetuation of breaking the premises law or breaking the law from the caution that is given to individual, and that is a big concern in the community.
Okay. What if there's a specific case that you're referring to? I'd be happy to look into that outside of this meeting. But I would say that as well as escalating our response, we have to have a proven issue. So we have to be able to prove that something has happened in order for us to respond to it, which can be difficult when we're trying to prove something that's taken place. But if there's a specific issue that you have in mind, I'll be happy to take that on for you.
Stephanie, how would you go about proving it?
So for example, if we wanted to take enforcement action by way of a FPN or by way of a prosecution, it would have to meet the criminal threshold of proof. So we would have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that a crime has been committed. So that may take us many months. It may take us lots of evidence gathering to actually prove that a crime has taken place. There's low-level things that are very, much easier to resolve. So if somebody's not displaying a correct sign somewhere, obviously things like that are much easier to overcome. But more serious matters can take many months for us to actually gather enough evidence to prove that a crime has taken place.
I just got one more question. When a license is given for an event that is not a permanent thing within a ward or an area, does the residents get notice that a license was applied for it and an event will be taking place in the community? I'm raising this because there was an event where a license was granted for a rave in Hammondsworth villages, and the residents were not aware of it. So what is the procedure for that? Is residents notified that this is going to happen? It's not a regular thing, it's a one-off thing, but I don't know if it will be, we don't know whether it will continue or whether it will happen somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. So as far as Licensing Act applications go, we don't notify residents, but the consultation requirements within the legislation dictate that you've got to advertise the application, you've got to put a poster up, and we do consult with ward councillors. I believe the incident you were referring to was done on a temporary event notice. in Harmon. Was this in the barn?
Yes.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the barn.
But it was near.
It was out of the barn.
Okay.
But it was used as it is in the barn, but it wasn't in the barn. It was
Yeah.
outside of the barn.
With temporary event notices, they are a light touch form of authorisation, and often we accept an application on good faith based on the information that is given in that application. And if there's no previous history or no other concerns, the police may have some other information about this particular case, but it's an automatically granted process. It's not a licence application, it's more of a notice. So the applicant notifies the authority that an event is going to take place, and unless there are, you know, significant or proven concerns, it has to be allowed to run. So unless we've got good reason to object to it, and I don't believe in that case we did, then it will be allowed to run.
Okay, thank you for that.
No problem.
It was only to hope I've got Councillor Nelson. Stephanie's absolutely right. So what you're talking about would be a temporary event notice. So the procedure for what happens there is that the team, the police, will be served this temporary event notice. We have 3 days in which to raise an objection based on the crime and disorder strand. Now, the problem being, the officers will need a significant, if you like, intelligence of there being a likelihood of crime and disorder, because if you object to that temporary event, which often we do, then the applicant is notified and they have the right to a hearing. So we could be sitting, as you know, within the hearing. So we have to make sure that our evidence is proportionate and our reasons are right. And also, in addition to that, the temporary event notice that is served within a licensing authority, that doesn't go through the usual 28-day consultation period than it would for a new premises licensing application. So, going back to your start of your question, ordinarily residents, interested parties, would not be notified of that, because that's the legislation that's in place. So it wouldn't go to consultation for a temporary event.
So what about the ward council? Will they be notified of it?
There's no legal requirement for that. There's no legal requirement. It's not to say that the licensing authority, I don't know the process, but certainly I can only speak for the police. We have an application for a temporary event. We wouldn't notify ward councillors.
I mean, is there any way to punish people who flagrantly abuse this licence? Because if I was setting up, you know, raves around London, this sounds like a brilliant way of basically getting them on, collecting all the money in cash, and then basically going somewhere else within, you know, going somewhere near Bromley, getting somebody else to put in the temporary licence. You know, is there any recourse that we can do to stop this?
Well, first of all, I understand what you're saying, but we're not talking, of course, rave. A temporary event is restricted to 499 people legally, including the staff. So there's legislative, it's in there that we're not talking about large-scale events. We're talking about events that are what they say on the tin, temporary, designed for that reason, for premises that haven't got a licence, or to either premises that have a licence to maybe extend their licensable conditions on trading hours. Your question is there any way, if people are abusing the system, if people are effectively lying on their applications, it's very difficult. We're putting people on their word that they're applying for a temporary event and they're going to run their event within the legal parameters of what's been given of them. Temporary events come in, the team will tell more than I will, but they come in, we get many of these all the time. So they're coming in thick and fast, and we do obviously vet temporary events. There's checks that we do on applicants, there's checks that we do from P&C, but these checks only go so far. The vast majority of temporary events, vast majority, are absolutely fine, crime-free.
I don't doubt that the vast majority are crime-free. I think it's pretty obvious, and I don't think anybody who's criminally motivated watches our YouTube sessions, so I'm not giving anybody who doesn't know about it business ideas. But, you know, if there is a barn with a big field around it, you get a temporary event, you within the criteria of whatever it is, you oversell your tickets, police turn up. At the beginning, people turn up, you say you've got a licence, police turn up, go, that licence doesn't cover that, but then suddenly the police have got this big issue. They don't want to create a more massive issue, but certainly manpower breaking it up. The people who, you know, at the end of the day, the people who put it on leave, their money, they're fine, everyone's fine apart from the local residents, and potentially they could get somebody else to do a temporary licence elsewhere. So I just wondered, in such circumstances, if people were running such a racket, I mean, is there any way to sort of, to punish them, I suppose?
Well, it would be an offence. So if we're minded to, we could gather evidence in terms of witness statements and prosecute under Section 136 of the Licensing Act. That's easier said than done, but that would be the recourse in that particular occasion.
Yeah, effectively, Daniel said it, you're running an unlicensed event effectively, so you deal with what you've got. It's resourceful, of course, and it's not good because we have to then go down to closure powers, and senior officer, police officer will need to be there, and it's not good. But what you're talking about is effectively it's breaking the law, so it's an offence. So we have to deal with it through our legal powers.
Darren.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of things. Just while we're on TENS, is there a way that we can put a pink sheet up? So if you apply 10 days before for your TENS notice, is there a way we could put that up in a window of a venue? So I know we let more councillors know, but if the venue or the site had this notice up 10 days prior, if there was any concerns, then our residents could raise that with the environmental teams or with licensing, etc. Is that something we can do, or is that...
It's not a statutory requirement, and if it is something that we would want to change, we'd have to make a significant change to our licensing policy. And I'd suggest for 10 that it's disproportionate, because the local residents, you cannot object to a temporary event notice as a local resident. The only people that have power to object to a 10 are the police, environmental health unit. I think that's it. Sorry, thank you. So as a local resident, whilst you may be concerned about a proposed event in your area or a proposed extension of hours in a pub, for example, you can't actually raise a representation in your own right. Although you could raise those concerns to the environmental health team or the police, but we wouldn't. We couldn't require the putting up of a notice, and given the turnaround times, as Graham said earlier, you literally put in the temporary event notice 10 working days. We have to determine it within, I think, 2 or 3 working days, and that includes the consultation with police and environmental health. So within that time, it's granted or it's acknowledged. It would require a complete change in policy, which I would suggest would be disproportionate for temporary event notices.
No worries, Chairman, I've got one more question. What number of incidents have you had on the weekend? So after you guys are off, are you noticing a higher number of incidents after COVID? And is this age-related as well?
Yes, obviously, it's quite simple to explain. For example, we will examine what we call our overnight crimes list, and we'll go through an individual list. Obviously, we have 1,672 licensed premises within the Borough of Hillingdon, of which 36% are, for example, pubs or clubs, predominantly pubs. So, for example, we predominantly look at violence with injury-related offences, crime disorder. There is a trend, an unfortunate trend, where I had noticed myself, or we have noticed, going through the digest, that the demographic age group of incidents related to violence with injury and antisocial behaviour within these premises, or within the confines or the outside area of the licensable area within the premises, is predominantly late teens and early 20s. So there's a significant, and there has been a significant change in the demographics of 18, 19-year-old individuals who potentially have been locked down teenagers for a year and a half, who haven't had the privilege of being able to go on to or into licensed premises and legally buy alcohol. And unfortunately, if you go into a venue which has a large capacity and you've got a mix of a certain type of age group, then they're just not experienced enough to enjoy or let's say behave in an environment that they are not used to. So yes, there has been a slight increase from that sort of demographic group and that sort of age group within pubs, predominantly within pubs, yes.
One more, sorry. Within the borough, so you guys cover Haystown, Uxbridge, etc. In Uxbridge, there's a high number of SIA door staff. Have you found that's had a better impact on preventing crime and disorder, or do you find it aggravates the younger residents?
No, not really. I mean, Uxbridge is individual. It's really effectively, it's our town centre for the borough. It's our nighttime economy. Collectively, the amount of licensed premises within a town centre, which is partially pedestrianised, is quite large. I think sometimes, with regard to obviously the bid team and the resources available in Uxbridge Town Centre, I mean, they've had a massive injection of police officers and a town centre team who now patrol on an early turn and a late turn. But you've also got private security guards who are SIA registered, who patrol in high visibility jackets, and also with the police town centre teams, the SIA door staff and the foot patrol SIA security staff all linked together on one radio channel via a control room which is based here at the Civic Centre. I think there has been a significant decrease in violent crime within Uxbridge Town Centre. That's notable. But some people would rather, yes, approach a security member of the SIA staff, a security door staff or a walking patrol unit rather than the police officer. But I think communication between all these leads and our partnership teams, I think works very well.
One last one. Within the venue, so your incidents that you have reported, have they come from the licensed premises or have they come from the residents within the area? So have you noticed that people who have lived next to pubs have reported the incident rather than the venues?
Again, if we just use Uxbridge Town Centre as an example, geographically, I would say it's probably 90% intelligence led is from the staff of the venue, security staff in direct communication with the CCTV operations room, who in turn are in direct link with the police via town centre radios. So it's most certainly intelligence led is from the venue itself rather than complaints or intelligence being received from residents, in my experience.
No more questions.
Scott.
Thank you. I'd like to just follow up on what's been discussed previously about these temporary events. Is there a gap between when you can have one temporary event and another temporary event? Or is it, is it like 6 months or something like that?
24 hours.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so with temporary event notices, you can have a maximum of a quota of 21 days over, I believe, 15 notices in any calendar year, and a notice can last for a maximum of 7 days. But if you wanted, you've got to leave a 24-hour gap between. So an event, in theory, could last 7 continuous days, non-stop, in theory. But you are limited to 21 days per calendar year, and that runs this calendar year, so January to December.
Wow, okay. So other questions I'd like to ask. I think Dan mentioned Pub Watch. I think there's something called Bet Watch as well, which is for betting shops. Are they in communication with each other as a separate thing? And also, off licences, are they included within Pub Watch?
My police colleagues may be better to give you a briefing on this, but Bet Watch, I believe, was established quite a few years ago. I don't actually know if that's still going in some of the areas, but there is, at the moment, there's nothing similar for the off-licence trade, I believe. But I'll pass over to...
Yeah, Stephanie's absolutely right. The Bet Watch initially was rolled out within Ealing, and we had a good established Bet Watch in Southall, and this must be about 5-6 years ago, and it grew quite well, and it was run by the trade. It's still there, but it's not. But I think the betting, certainly with COVID, has been as well. It's fallen away recently, as is quite a lot of things have, haven't they? But that isn't to say there's not one embedded within Hillingdon that I'm aware of. Hayes. Okay, so Dave knows more than me. Hayes. In respect of off-licence venues, no, there isn't. I'm correct on that, am I? Yes. No, there isn't. But there is very active pub watches, which you know about. Very active pub watches on all three sectors, which are up and running, and they're very good.
I would just add on that with Pub Watch, Bet Watch, and any of these kind of trade groups, it's not down to us to convene these or create these groups. It's very much down to the trade organising themselves. Pub Watch, I believe, has got to a really, really good point in the borough where you've got some really strong local chairs of the Pub Watch groups around the borough, and they've really taken on the role, and they work really hard to do the meetings and everything. It's really down to the trade to kind of organise themselves, and we will support that whenever we can as regulators and as enforcers. But if the group doesn't exist, and there's actually very little we can do to actually encourage a group to be formed.
Scott, can I just come in on this? Out of curiosity then, why would pubs form a Pub Watch, and also what benefit do you get from Pub Watch?
Well, why do they join the Pub Watch? Well, they get significant benefit of being the Pub Watch because they get to, of course, share the information between each other, and Dave's already spoken about the radio link that exists, and that only isn't active at the time when people turn up at licensed premises that may be causing problems or creating issues, and that works really well. So they join it because it benefits them. They join it because they get early notifications from issues, individuals, nominals that might be causing issues elsewhere, and it keeps them in that link. It keeps them within that community, if you like, of the trade. And it's a really good scheme for them to be in. We have never had any problems, particularly getting the trade to be in the Pub Watch. Maybe some of the other ones that are out on the periphery a little bit and out on the side, which is logistically harder for them to attend. But it's always been really well taken up. And your second question, which I can't remember, what? Yeah, and what do we get out of it? So what Stephanie's already said, a Pub Watch, when it's in its infancy and a Pub Watch starts, Pub Watch is born, if you like, police will go in there, and we will, as do the local authority, we've assisted and we helped to get these set up. But then we must retract, and we must go back, because the pub, it's a fine line, it's a fine balance, because you sit there and listen to the Pub Watch meeting, as my colleagues go to every Pub Watch meeting, and then they'll give their updates and they'll give their talk, and then they'll retract, move away, because maybe things aren't going to be discussed whilst they're there. But they'll tell you what they get out of it. They'll get good information. They'll get to know their trade, understand the trade. The trade will build that working relationship. They'll get trust, and that's integral when you're dealing with enforcement later and issues down the line. And I'm a big believer in Pub Watch, and I think it's an excellent scheme, and one which has been around a while.
So before I was a councillor, I was a member at Pub Watch, and my previous career was a publican. The impact that Pub Watch has for the local community is amazing. So here is in Uxbridge they do ban for one, ban from all. So if you're barred from a pub for antisocial behaviour, some form of crime and disorder, you're barred from every pub. And you find that just stops a knock-on effect from someone, say, doing drugs in your toilets. It stops it. It also allows information sharing if there was an undesirable event going on within the borough or within Hayes Town. All 25 pubs that are a member of Hayes Pub Watch will be able to spread them details out, contact Dave, contact Penny, and let them know exactly what's going on. It's one of the most effective things done by publicans. and I can say safely that has protected myself within my venue when I had one, with anything else.
Does sound like a very good model, Stephanie. Yeah.
I was just going to add that you were sort of asking what we get out of it. The police have explained from their point of view, but from the local authority, it has been invaluable to us to actually get information to licensed premises. So particularly through COVID, where there seemed to be new regulations every day and new rules every day, and what do you do with a Scotch egg, and what do you do at curfew, and all of this stuff constantly, and actually to have a channel that we could put our advice and updated information and, you know, risk assessment templates and just help that we wanted to give to these businesses. It was so invaluable just to be able to channel that through one place and know and trust that that information would get out. So in terms of, you know, and for future as well, you know, legislative changes that are affecting the trade, you know, intelligence, it really is a good gateway to be able, for us to be able to get what we need to into that particular sector.
It does sound like a good model for you know, areas where antisocial behaviour might attract themselves to. Of course, different, you know, off licensing, the betting shops might also have different motivations, which is why they don't take off so much. But no, that's a really, I knew it existed, but I hadn't really realised that's how it works. So that's really interesting. Thank you, Scott. Do you have anything else? Yeah.
Thank you. I want to go back to the licensing process, if I may. I do watch licensing on YouTube. I find them quite fascinating sessions. I want to understand, I think that Sergeant Edwards mentioned this part of his opening speech, with the applicants, the rigorousness with which the council and the authorities check these individuals, all the venues or whatever it is that they're looking at licensing, because when I watch the events, I'm not, or the sessions, the licensing sessions, I'm not. Far be it from me, I'm not trained in all this, so I don't know. But I don't get the feeling that some of the applicants, in some instances, don't fully understand that their responsibilities with regards to licensing objectives and so on. And so I'm wondering how rigorous we are, how rigorous the authorities are, and how rigorous we can be in ensuring that they are fit and proper people to be.
So go back to the beginning. What checks are done? So I think you're referring to new applicants, really, for premises license. So every new applicant would serve the licensing authority. In turn, the licensing authority, the application will be in turn served to all other responsible authorities, one of which is the police. So I'm going to speak for the police. What do we do? So our checks will run through. First and foremost would be a PNC, Police National Computer Check, to check for any convictions. The way that runs on a new application is it's the level of is on conviction of a relevant offence. Now, relevant offences are the offences that you would ordinarily, a person would guess are relevant offences: sexual offences, violence, drugs, all the things that you would think. Drink drive is one of them. All the things you think, if someone was involved or running a licensed premise, is that maybe what we should be seeing. So we'll do that vetting checks initially straight away. Beyond that, there is a provision within the Licensing Act that if someone doesn't have a relevant offence, because we're talking about conviction here, and there's weed times as well. There's also weed times between individual offences, and I won't go in too deep into it, but it's weed time. But if someone, for instance, does not have a conviction for a relevant offence, there's still a provision to object on new applicant through exceptional circumstances within the Licensing Act, which is embedded in there. And we have done that. We have done that on a couple of occasions, and these could be for a number of different reasons. But of course, exceptional circumstances are that exceptional, and we have, and each time we've done it, we'll end up at a hearing and potentially at a court. So you need to have robust objections, and they need to be proportionate, and of course they need to be right and correct. So in summary, it's difficult. We're really checking on a person's. We're not really as such doing character checks because we know nothing of these individuals often. We're doing relevant offence convictions. But of course, if you, and I'll try and wind this up quickly because I'll go on, but if you've got an applicant that's coming in and they get a licence, and of course they don't promote the licence and objectives, and they start failing, then there's processes there that we then subsequently need to go down, all the processes we've talked about over the last hour or so.
I mean, when I was on the committee, I'd be asking what the licensing objectives mean to you, how are you going to keep to them? I mean, and that was an answer that I would expect a good answer to, because at least, so I think a combination of, I thought the information we got was pretty good within the realms of what you could give, I suppose, and then by asking those questions did help. But Stephanie, you wanted to come in this as well.
I was just going to add, the licensing regime is very much like your driving licence. You're given your driving licence, and if you behave yourself and you're really great at driving, then you'll get to keep it. It's the same principle with an alcohol licence. If you abide by all the rules and you're really good, but it's something you get a chance on. It's a suck it and see kind of situation. That's not to say that, and just following on from what Graham said about the vetting that we can do, if we've had a premises where we think there's something untoward going on, or if we have a particular individual that's just raised some flags, quite often the responsible authorities, including the police, perhaps trading standards as well, will actually get that applicant in for a chat and a talk, and we'll ask that applicant, what are your intentions for your business, or what experience have you had in the licensed trade. So we can pick at that person a little bit, but I go back to the proportionality thing. There's got to be a good enough justification for us to be able to do that. And we don't do that with everybody. It's only in really exceptional cases where we might group responsible authorities together to actually quiz that person on their intentions about their business.
Chair, sorry, if I could just add one thing. Because that's the first thing you mentioned at the beginning. Also, which I failed to mention, all applicants then to become a DPS, so be authorised to sell alcohol by retail, you need a personal licence. A personal licence, you have to attend a course. So there is some degree of, outside of the governance we got here, there is some degree of a course, if you like, in the outside world that you have to go through, pass an exam. So you have to, you'd like to think, have some level of knowledge before you apply in the first place.
Yeah, it's far be it for me to say it again because I don't have the training or the experience with this stuff. But courses are all well and good, but people can get through them, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all above board. But for me, it's sort of the prevention rather than having to go through all the rigmarole. Because, as it's been discussed tonight, the time to actually get anything sort of moving, to actually get to a point where, from a resident's point of view, a resolution is achieved, can be very lengthy. And all that time disruption is caused to residents. So obviously, the more that can be done before a licence is given, if at all possible, all the better from my point of view and from the residents, I'm sure. Thank you.
June.
I just want to go back about talking about the pub bits with the pub watch and the bet watch. What about premises watch? Because you're saying that each businesses or the premises, they're the ones who does the link. But what about these premises that sells the food shops or the corner shops that sells alcohol to individuals who cause a lot of antisocial behavior from buying the alcohol, either loitering at corners or in parks on the benches, and causing a nuisance to residents? What protection is there for them? Because if they're responsible for forming their own organisation, where does that leave the public open to that? Because some of these premises have license at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, the ones that open 24 hours, or you got those ones that have a license to about midnight, and you have lots of, as you rightly say, people were locked up for God knows how long. I forgot about the time of that, but now it's all coming back of people drinking in the parks, people drinking, buying lots of alcohol, drinking in the corners. in the shopway or in the stairway of properties or premises, and at the same time using this gas. What you call the gas? Nitrous oxide gas, and causing a whole heap of problem. The bottles all over the place, you know, broken bottles being spread in gardens, in corners, and this is the sort of things we have to deal with every day. So what happened with those licensed premises? Who police them?
It would be the police and us. It would go back to enforcement. So where there's intelligence or where there's evidence, it would go back to enforcement. So if there's specific enforcement that can be done in relation to a particular premises, a lot of the issues you're describing are very, very tricky to tie back to a specific premises. So broken bottles, drinking in parks, it's very, very difficult for us to prove that the sale has contributed to a particular problem. The sale in itself may have been lawful, so the business may have made the sale completely lawfully, but the after effects of the alcohol being consumed have caused the problem. So it's very, very difficult to actually pin that and actually prove a crime on an individual premises. It's a very, very tricky area of enforcement. You know, I never managed to completely do it when I was sitting in Dan's seat, and it's an ongoing issue. I think in most areas of the borough, I believe, that where it's very, very tricky to actually prove a specific premises is linked to the after effects of alcohol being sold. It's one of the things as regulators that we're very near on impossible to prove.
And also, I mean, pubs control their premises where people consume the alcohol. Off licences don't, and you know, I might be somebody who gets pretty violent when I get drunk. I don't, I fall asleep, but I might go to an off licence, buy some alcohol, then I go sit in the pub, drink it, and then you know, and there is a connection. But is that connection the responsibility of the off licence? I think it's more trickier, isn't it, than it is with pubs. But it does cause the issues, as June points out. So, which is why we're concerned about it. Right, okay, I think I'm going to call time. Okay, I didn't mean that joke, but anyway. I think I'm going to call time on the licensing chat, because that's been a really good half an hour. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. Again, similar with the fire service, you may stay, but there's no need for you to stay if you don't wish to. Great. Okay, so we'll move on now to our Safer Hillingdon Partnership Performance Report. So we have Superintendent Anthony Bennett here. Welcome. And Anish Sharma. I don't have your title, your grade, Sergeant Anish Sharma, and of course Jackie Robertson, who joins us regularly. So I'm happy for you to present as you wish.
Yeah, I think what I'll do, if I go through the figures that we've got, what I'll be doing is comparing the 2019-2020 figures with 2021 to February 2022. The reason for that is because obviously the year before that was a very abnormal year with the lockdown, so it gives a bit of a better comparison really in terms of where we are. I'll also touch on some of the work we're doing in locally around professional standards. I know that's a significant issue regarding the Metropolitan Police at this moment in time, and just cover some bits on stop and search as well. Again, quite relevant in relation to the child queue issues, which again have arisen over the last week. So in terms of performance, I'll just go down some of the key sort of crime areas. So violence against the person we are down 6% against the March 2019 and February 2020 figures compared to March 2021 and February 2022. Violence with injury is actually down 8%. In terms of robbery offences, those are down 46% for Hillingdon. Burglary offences down 52%. Vehicle offences down 24%. General theft offences, which includes things like shoplifting, down 24%. And drugs offences down 1%, and possession of weapons, offensive weapons, is down 8%. So across those areas, a generally good figure with total notifiable offences, so all crimes are down 14% in Hillingdon across that comparison. One thing which we need to really work on, though, is the sexual offences, where we have seen an increase in Hillingdon of 44%. That does follow increases across the wider MPS. The reasons for that, some of those will be historical reporting, and we've been working hard through last year to encourage more people to report sexual offences, crimes to police with our partners. Some of that was driven by the Sarah Everard and what happened after that in terms of the attention such offences got. And also, obviously, post-lockdown, there was more people coming forward to report what happened during the lockdown period. So, unsurprisingly, a lot of our work and priority through last year and going into this year is against violence and violence against women and girls. And if I just go through some of the activities we're doing around that to provide some reassurance, because that figure isn't acceptable and we do need to bring that down, that is quite clear. In terms of our public protection team, we're just making sure they're properly staffed, and locally we've made an effort to prioritise filling their vacancies on their teams ahead of other teams to enable we've got the right people in the right place. Last year we got an additional chief inspector for the public protection team and also an additional inspector as well, just so we can give better supervision and drive more initiatives forward to improve those figures. Also, what's happened across the MPS, and obviously that covers the West area as well, is that there's been an increase in officers for rape and sexual offences. So I believe that's 7 officers, and we've also uplifted into the team that covers domestic assaults as well. So actually putting additionality in their teams above their normal figures that they would have, and that is ongoing as we speak. In terms of the court, we are working with the CPS to try and speed up court cases to prevent the risk of a few of those cases falling before they reach a conclusion. And we're also training our staff on domestic abuse. So that is really to try and, so when they go into an incident, they know how to do that effectively to secure the best outcome for the victim. And that includes support for the victim as well, about how best we can do that and make those referrals. One thing also in terms of legislation, stalking protection orders, that is something which we are actively using on Hillingdon as well. I believe we've got the highest number for the NEBCUs in terms of the use of those, but we do need to get those numbers increased further. In terms of other activity, in terms of locations, we've had significant funding put into police last year to fund patrolling activity in key areas where violence against women and girls is an issue. Obviously, that's one reason why the town centre teams are brought in, and obviously Uxbridge has benefited from that. There is a wider benefit for the other areas of Hillingdon in terms that it does free up things like the partnership tasking team and the neighbourhood tasking team to patrol other areas such as Hayes Town. Because previously they may have got tied into Uxbridge more, but they can now patrol those areas. And that also includes things like our gangs teams, etc. With the town centre team here, it does hopefully lead to a wider benefit and reduced demand in the Uxbridge location. We've also been working on something called Street Safe. So that is a new initiative which came in last year, where people can report online where they don't feel safe, and that's particularly aimed at women and girls that in their local areas. So that is ongoing. It needs to be built, but we are getting reports through, and then we'd work with the partnership around how we improve those locations. So it could be improving things like street lighting, additional police activity, litter, etc. Really, it's all those sort of things which make the perception of that area not feel right for people, and that they're afraid to walk through it either during the day or the evening. And what is linked to that as well is a walk and talk initiative, and you might have seen some of these last week as part of the International Women's Day events, where our offer is that we'll walk through an area with females that where they don't feel safe, and have a talk through as to why that is the case. Again, it's an early days for that initiative, but we had some really good pickups in Hinden last week, and also we covered Hounslow as well. And that's just really just gives a bit of value-added information for us and also interaction with the public around those issues to address their personal safety. Another thing also, we're going to schools, so secondary schools, and we're starting to go more into primary schools where we talk about personal safety and what is acceptable and what not acceptable. Also has to be tailored to the age group of the pupils we speak to, but those are the sort of conversations we're having when we're actually going into school locations. So that sort of gives you a feel, really. We've also got last year's, I think it's £120,000 in problem-solving funding, and a lot of that went towards tackling the violence in general, which would include violence against women and girls. So that's funded search wands for neighbourhood teams, knife arches, additional patrolling activity, and also CCTV cameras and a number of other initiatives. And that we're also funding some activity to work with youths that might be susceptible to violence in terms of some diversion activities as well. So that is sort of the violence against women and girls sort of piece really in terms of what we've been doing, and there is some additional work which we're doing around that as well. In terms of the professional standards, again, Sarah Rogers is a catalyst really for making us look internally at ourselves and how we operate. There's obviously been a number of other stories since that time about police standards and unacceptable behaviour, inappropriate language, and you know, we really need to address ourselves and really look at ourselves hard to make change in our organisation and the culture within that. It is a minority of officers, but I suggest it's a sizable minority that we do need to address. We can't just ignore it as a few bad apples. And that's what we're doing effectively. Every officer over the last month and a half has received 2 briefings, every single officer in the West area, and that is replicated Met-wide, basically detailing what is acceptable and what their responsibilities are. If they hear or see anything, they need to report it or challenge it at that time. We can no longer just ignore it and think, well, we didn't say it and walk on. We have to really challenge that moving forward, and that's a message we've been pushing out quite clearly to officers over the last few weeks. On top of that, we've also enhanced our professional standards team centrally in the NPS to create more consistency and more thoroughness around investigations. So some of those investigations which would have sat locally before now sit centrally, and that supports us really in terms of dealing with things in a better way, in a more consistent way. That involves also some case reviews that will be conducted as well, again centrally. Baroness Casey, as you would have seen, is also coming to review how we do things in the Met, and West Area have a meeting with her tomorrow, so she can get a local perspective around how we deal with things internally within West Area. Again, other activity is going on around that, but another thing around professional standards, and which is quite pertinent today with the release of the Daniel Morgan report, as well as how we deal with property. And we started about a month ago really getting into our property and making sure that everything is recorded accurately and properly, and officers are aware of their responsibilities around that. And that is something which will be ongoing for a long time. Again, property, it's always been a problem in terms of how police deal with it. We should have dealt with it better than we have done up to date, but we are getting on top of that with the initiatives that are going on, and there'll be more directions around how we deal with property moving forward. Again, titled Daniel Morgan report today is around declarable associations with journalists or people that may have criminal backgrounds. And again, we're speaking to every single officer on West Area to ensure they're aware of what their responsibilities are around that, and make sure that any associations which should be declared are declared as well. Again, it's that whole professional standards piece, a real focus from us internally. In terms of stop and search, just give us some assurances around stop and search. We've got a really good Chief Inspector that is driving forward our approach to stop and search on the BCU. And I know this is pertinent to the child queue issues, which again I won't go into detail on that because I don't have much more on what's been in the press really around that. But I think you know, the Met's been quite clear that incident shouldn't have happened, and they've apologised to the family around that. There will be clearly some learning we're going to have to take on board and drive through as part of that. But I think the regulations are quite clear, and our officers are clear of what they should and shouldn't do in those circumstances. And we are reiterating that, obviously, over the last few days, post that report that came out in relation to child queue. In terms of proportionality of searching, as I say, we've got Paddy Gruhl, who's one of our chief inspectors, that drives this forward, and we work with partners around some of this. So we've got a community monitoring group set up. So they regularly meet, and there's a group within Hillingdon, and effectively the group sort of look at the process of how we do searches, and they can monitor our performance and our proportionality around that. And those are up and running in the Hillingdon area. So there's two meetings. So there's a meeting held every 3 months, and some of that covers body-worn video footage as well around our interactions and how those are dealt with. Stop and search is a key part of our new recruits. So when they come to the street duties at Uxbridge, we do cover stop and search with them and go through that in quite a lot of detail. And we do bring members of the community monitoring group to those as well to give their view on stop and search, and also the Youth Justice Service come along to those as well. So again, it's giving that local feel to stop and search and making them feel, trying to get across to the officers how it feels to be stopped and search as well. We've got youth scrutiny panels as well. That's in Ealing at the moment, but we're trying to get one in place at Hillingdon as well. And I think getting more young people involved with us so we can understand their views on stop and search is really key to how we improve moving forward. And we do general engagements events as well. So there was an event in December in Haystown where we did talk about stop and search, and we did one in January in Uxbridge High Street as well. So again, just getting out there, giving the opportunity for people to ask us about stop and search as well. One thing we have improved on significantly as well over the last 6 months is how we supervise stop and search. So what was happening is officers weren't supervising them quickly enough. So we're putting a more rigorous process now where stop and searches are supervised as quickly as possible by the supervisors, so we can feed back any issues to the officers that are out there. And I think having that review and making it more of a disciplined process for the supervisors makes them consider the actions of officers a bit better as well. So again, that's another improvement we've put in place around stop and search. And I suppose that's a very quick run through of some of those key issues around that we're experiencing within the MPS and also the crime position as well. So I don't know if Jackie wants to add anything to that.
Not in relation to the data, because I think I'd be going backwards. I would be giving you Q3 data when Anthony's already given it up to date. However, what I can do is to give you a quick update in relation to the Safer Hillingdon Partnership Board. So back in the autumn, we commissioned a review and a relaunch of the Safer Hillingdon Partnership, and we wanted to look at what the current position was and what we could do better. So using the expertise of those involved, we wanted to look at how we could work better in partnership, how we could use data better and use more enriched data to enable us to make more better informed decisions and shape those priorities for the board, and also how we could engage better with neighbourhoods and other boards that were already in existence, such as the Hillingdon Neighbourhood Watch, the Safer Neighbourhood Board, and ward panels. Now, ward panels, I think, are quite significant, and I went to one just before this meeting, actually, and listening to some of the complaints from the residents, for me, they were quick win solutions that we as a local authority can deal with and leave the police to deal with the more serious offences, so whether it's parking or dropping litter and things like that. But how we can be more effective, and I think the purpose of me attending these meetings is to try and strengthen that partnership working, so it triangulates between the police, the residents, ward panel chairs and the local authority. But for an example, following the two tragic incidents back in the end of the year and also in January in West Drayton, I attended a ward panel meeting and listened to some of the concerns that were made by those attending. We were then able to apply for some MOPAC funding. One of the concerns raised was in relation to a knife bin in West Drayton. So we were successful in bidding for this money, and actually we've now secured a knife bin which will be placed in West Drayton shortly. We were also able to fund 10 presentations from street doctors, and they give presentations on to young people and staff working with them, so that if somebody were to present themselves having been stabbed, it's how they can save that person's life prior to the emergency services arriving. And we were also able to purchase 31 bleed control kits, which and the training from the Daniel Baird Foundation that goes with them. So they too will be going out into strategic places. But that funding and the way it was spent came as a result of attending that meeting. So the work that's being carried out in relation to the review of the Safe Hillingdon Partnership is likely to end in May or June. So I'll be able to update the board in September as to what's happened. The priorities for 2020-21 were reducing violence, reducing ASB, reducing drug offences, reducing burglary, robbery, reducing domestic abuse, and reducing hate crime. Now, I don't think any of those priorities for this current year are going to look too different. I know that reducing violence is a top priority, or one of the top priorities for the police. But what I do think is about how we're going to be dealing with those issues moving forward, which has come about as part of the review. So, for example, ASB, I think ASB is an issue in most wards, but it's the different types of ASB will differ from ward to ward. So instead of looking at ASB as a whole, we'll be treating the different types of ASB per ward, if you like. And I suppose the other thing, if you look at reducing violence, as with all these other priorities, what is becoming quite apparent now is that we are looking more at prevention and early intervention rather than dealing with things retrospectively. We're looking to try and prevent them occurring in the first place. So, for example, reducing violence, we have funded several schemes that have gone into schools in relation to there was one organisation called Unlock Drama that went into a couple of secondary schools, and they were through drama looking at issues such as gang culture, knife crime and violence reduction. But then we also go to the other end where we are looking at using our own Dr. Bite scheme within the council to go into establishments where perhaps some of these young people are less academic but would thrive on learning different skills, so it's those diversionary tactics. We also work very closely with Safer Schools officers, and we use funding that comes from the Safer Neighbourhood Board to set up things like football clubs, boxing clubs, and in fact I think one of the female schools officers is due to start an all-female boxing club. That's coming up very soon. And we're also now engaging more with primary schools and trying to get in the early prevention methods there as well.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll have a couple of questions and open up to colleagues. You've been here long enough tonight to know you know the drill. So, but my first question, I suppose, is going to be, around those bigger issues that you touched upon about confidence in our police service. And while those the two major incidents, I suppose, Sarah Everard and Charles Q happened elsewhere, it still happened within London, and we still feel the vibrations from those. But I'm just wondering about accountability. How are you going to show or give communities the confidence that you are accountable to them? Because I think that's one of the key things that comes out of this, or the wider sort of issues.
I think, ultimately, coming to sessions like this, which the public can dial into, is, it's making sure that we relay those messages, those reassurance, and give confidence that we are doing what we should do to address those issues. I think it's also a two-way thing, so it's just trying to maximise those occasions where we can actually allow the public to question us directly as well. So that would be doing more community events, getting out into the high streets, getting out into where events are being held, or religious establishments as well, and just being visible. So, and whilst we might be there for what we call an outreach event, which is where we try and encourage people to join us from underrepresented groups, I think we can have those conversations, because people do. They'll come up to us and have those, speak to us about that. And that, talking about outreach, getting a more representative police force is quite key to our current priorities. And I think that if we can be more representative of the community, I think that provides reassurance in itself as well. So I think those mechanisms, I think trying to build on how we engage with young people as well is important. And again, some of the things around stop and search, trying to get young people involved with that, I think again shows that we're accountable to them. We want to listen to them as well. So I think there's a number of mechanisms, which some of which are in place already, and some which we need to build on in the future. But I think those would be some of the key ways.
I mean, those all. Sorry, can you say your microphone? Otherwise, you get terrible feedback. So those are all definitely very, very good things. But one of the things I'm interested about is communication, and in terms of, because if communities or people are telling you stuff, it's the messages they get back that you're taking that on board, taking that seriously, and are interested in that, which I think is very powerful in terms of bringing people together. And I just wondered if there's any sort of anything going on, or what your views are in terms of how those communities can be communicated back to about what their input is important. Is there anything around that happening?
We also have a public attitude survey, so they come in. So we are going out into the public via those mechanisms, which are driven by MOPAC and centrally within the MPS to get those views around what people's perceptions are locally around policing. And I think it'd be up for us to use those via the wall panels, again via community events, that we talk about those issues that are raised and show that we are working towards those and making a difference. I think we can be better, and this is one piece of work which I'm trying to drive forward, around showing people that you said this is your concern, and trying to get out better in terms of what we've done around that, in terms of practically what we've done. And some of that will be using traditional media, better use of social media, and looking at partnerships around where we can actually promote what we do better. Because I think we do listen to the public, and we need to do that more. But I think in terms of then letting the public know that we have listened to them, I think, as you say, there's more work needed on that. And I think we can take that forward along with those other mechanisms which I've sort of just alluded to.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very powerful thing. The other thing, which is obviously, again, I really only know what I've seen in the news, of course, but the thing is, most of us only know what we've seen in the news. So what we've seen in the news is very important in terms of our impressions of what's going on. And the impression that's going on, which is probably a false impression, but still is the impression that's out there, is that unacceptable behaviour is not challenged. And so, there might be fewer bad apples, but it seems to be that bad behaviour is not being challenged, which obviously if bad behaviour is not challenged within an organisation, it starts spreading through the organisations, all leading to very negative consequences. So I just wondered, how within the culture of the local police here, how are you encouraging bad behaviour to be challenged?
Well, so that's been the primary focus of the briefings that we've given over the last few weeks is around, standing by and just listening to it and then walking away, even if you're not part of it, isn't acceptable anymore. So, it's some people challenge in different ways. Some people have different personalities. So if you don't feel that you've got the confidence to challenge that person at that time for that inappropriate comment, we're just encouraging them to report those to supervisors. Also, we've introduced new ways of reporting, so they can report anonymously, so they don't actually have to give their name in the report. So we've had this previously with some professional standards aspects, but now we've really pushed that forward, but also around issues around inappropriate sexual behaviour against females. There's a specific method of recording those as well anonymously. So that is sort of one of those things which we've put forward to try and encourage people to report more, so they don't have to, because some people will find it difficult to go to supervisor, particularly if they think there's a culture on the team of the supervisor not listening to them. And again, that's something which we're going to work with supervisors around, is how they deal with these issues, because I think we've mostly not given enough support to them in terms of how to deal with those complaints when they come in, or those issues when they arise. So those mechanisms around that reporting, where people don't have to give their name and they can report it to someone who isn't in their immediate line management, in immediate supervisory line of management, then again, that's just help encourage those reports to come in, and then we can address those properly and challenge them properly. I think the problem is too much isn't being reported, and hence those issues on teams can then, as you say, they fester and grow and become bigger issues. So we need to get in there very quickly when a problem arises, and so being very clear around the messaging.
And before I pass on to my colleagues, I wanted to say positive. I've noticed a lot of the work that's being done around sort of female safety and unacceptable behaviour in that area by the police locally, and I think that seems to be a very positive thing for me. So it has been noticed, which is good. So hopefully it'll lead to positive outcomes. So June, you have your hand up. Sorry, microphone, June.
Sorry. The McPherson report is what you're repeating here again. The police hasn't changed. And in my community, we don't trust the police. And I need you to take that back to the top, because it is relevant in all communities. You said in regards to antisocial behaviour, and knife crime and stop and search. Our youths don't trust the police with stop and search. How are you engaging our youths to do that? Because they make it clear they don't trust you with the stop and search. So as much as you said you're engaging with the youths to help with the stop and search and to observe what is being done, they don't trust you. So they're not going to help you in that. And I'm giving this to you from the heart. It's not acceptable. They're not going to do it. As much as you're trying to work towards that, it's not going to happen. Until the trust in the police service throughout every community, that they can say, yes, we trust the police, that's when you're going to get that support. Yes, there is some good police officers, but there's a core of very nasty ones that continue to perpetrate exactly what's happening and what's coming out now. And you know why? Because there's social media and there is information now coming out, and this is why it's coming to the public attention. But this has been going on for years, and McPherson raised that in the Stephen Lawrence report, and it's what happened 20 years ago, 22 years ago, still happening today. So it's no different, okay? And that's from the heart. In regards to antisocial behaviour, how are you working in regards to antisocial behaviour with the local council and the police? Because it's a big problem, it's a big issue in community, in the borough. And we've got antisocial behaviour where I was raising the issue on the premises, the premises licensing. When residents make contact or they would call the police, or when they do call the police, they said, oh, it's an antisocial behavior. We don't have the officers to deal with that. It's not a high priority. Okay? So therefore, individuals getting residents to report, they say, why? Why are we going to report when the police is not doing anything about it? So how are you going to engage residents to do that? You said you've got an online services. Online services come back and said that the issue's being dealt with, so there's nothing that we can do. Residents is not getting no support in regards to antisocial behaviour, and that is causing a big problem. Because if you want to engage with residents. If you want to get residents on board, you need to have the people there to help and assist that. At least if the residents can build confidence with the police to say, yes, we know a police officer, we know who we can talk to. In our local different groups, we're supposed to have S&T. We've got one police officer, no S&T. So where is this coming from? How is the residents going to build that support and that rapport with the police to enable to reduce antisocial behavior? And it comes from all different works of life. It comes from drink and drugs. It comes from the nitrogen thing late in the evening. You know, it comes, and these are some of the people that's perpetrating this is youth, because there's no youth services or anything to help to keep them occupied. So how are you going to build that confidence within the community to do that? And can you tell us, when will we get the accountable S&T and police officers within our different constituencies that has been promised so many times, and we don't have any? Because I know in my ward, we only have one police constable, 2 now. We're supposed to have 2 S&T, we have none. So can you answer that question, please?
Yeah, can we split June's questions into 2? Obviously, there's the first point about the trust in the black community, which obviously, you know, it's very good to be truthful and talk about how we feel. And then obviously the second point about dealing with ABS. So on the first point.
Yeah, you know, I'll acknowledge that since the McPherson report was made, the police have not made anywhere near as much progress. I think in terms of having people within the police that are more representative of the community, again, we've not made anywhere near enough progress around that. There are conversations in groups where we do try and interact with the various communities across London, and those conversations don't just happen locally, they do happen you know, centrally, and then that gives the opportunity to, from a West Area perspective, just to understand what's going on in terms of those conversations. But I think locally, I've taken on the neighbourhood role back in December. I think I acknowledge that we're not doing near enough as much as we'd like around youth engagement, and I totally accept your view that the youth may not want to engage with us, particularly black youths, going by how they've been treated by the Metropolitan Police in the past. I think there's not a short-term solution to that, and I think I'd be silly to suggest there was. I think all we can do is, a bit like I was talking about the work around stop and search, is to try and look at how we do things, try and do it better in a more proportional way, try and explain that to the local community about how we're trying to improve and how we need the community to work with us on that. And then hopefully we see some incremental change. I accept that after the McPherson force, it's mostly dented a lot of trust in how the police's ability to actually make that change and make that difference and build the trust within communities. And incidents which have happened over the last year have mostly set us back from where we were. But I know locally the SLT is committed to try and engage where we can with the different communities, and we've just got to keep working hard, look at new ways of doing that, and build those bridges. But I know you mostly think you've heard that before, and it has been said before, but we've just got to keep trying, really, I think, and acknowledging that we've made mistakes and not made as much progress as we'd actually want to.
I'm aware that there's massive feedback if there's 2 microphones going on. I think this is one of those things where you have the flashpoints which highlight what's going on, and certainly the strengths of feelings. I think this is something that, you know, in 6 months' time, when we have the police back with us, you know, more talk about the evidence of the change and the communication and what's going on to deal with that would be really appreciated, I think, because you're right, these incidents have come up and these words have happened, and, you know, as June put it, actually, you know, it doesn't feel like things are changing for those people who really feel like things aren't changing. So it'd be really good to, you know, in 6 months' time when you come back, if we can talk about actually what is going on to change this stuff. So that'd be really good. On the ABS point that June raised, and getting a system together which works for the local community and gives confidence to the local community, I'm looking at Jackie. I don't know if this is one you lead on, or if not, I'm happy for Superintendent to lead on it. But
I think looking at the ASB issues, following, and this is quite pertinent around getting around the ward panels, following your ward panel, Councillor Nelson, I then spoke to the Safer Neighbourhood, or arranged to speak to the Safer Neighbourhood officer to see how we can better work together. And I think this is really important in trying to build up this partnership working, if you like. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I did today when I went to another ward panel meeting, and there were various issues around ASB discussed. And last week I met with 2 Safer Neighbourhood officers from Hillingdon East, and we were looking at what we could do jointly, how we could hold different events to raise awareness in some of these issues. And I think we have an event planned for the 8th of April in Hillingdon East, purely to address some of those issues. So we are working on it, and it is something that we are doing at the moment.
Thank you. Darren.
I got a couple of questions, as always.
You're capped at 2.
Oh, I've got 5. No, ward panels, you say they're a massive part. I know we're not meant to talk about wards, but in Charville we had a really effective ward panel. But with the changes, what's happened with the Met, my ward panel chairman has resigned, and I went to try and build a new ward panel to meet up with the police. They arranged an event. The event they arranged wasn't even at a venue that was allowed to have it. It had been cancelled. They'd asked no permission or anything like that. So myself and my ward colleagues went, and we met 2 officers that didn't even know their own event had been cancelled. So Charville had a really strong, and I think the chairman was brilliant. And now my residents are at risk of not having that ward panel impact. Why have we made these big changes to ward panels that were working really well? And also, SNT, is it true that the SNT officers are only with us for 6 months? I believe we've got new officers coming to the ward, they're only there for 6 months and then shipped out. If that's the case, by the time they learn the hotspots within our ward, they'll be gone. And I don't think that's very good for my residents.
In terms of ward panels, they shouldn't effectively change. I think with the ward boundary changes, we're still working within the NPS around what that will look like and mean for us. So up until that point, ward panels should be operating how they should have always operated. So we haven't changed or removed the criteria around that. I think if your ward panel chair has suddenly found out that he's not within the boundary of the ward and he's made the decision to leave, I can't answer for that particularly. But so at the moment we're just maintaining an as-is position until we work through. And there's a meeting tomorrow within the NPS where we're discussing how we're going to approach the ward boundary changes moving forward. In terms of the officers moving every 6 months, some officers are on rotation, so as part of their probationary period, officers rotate across response teams and neighbourhoods, so they have to do 6 months across each one. So that's why some officers do go into a ward and then rotate out, because that is how we get them to learn the role of the neighbourhood officer and also response teams as well. So that's why you do get the rotation. Sometimes if you've got a vacancy, it makes it feel like that's your ward officer, but we're always trying to fill the vacancy so you get 2 permanent officers, and then sometimes what you'll have then is an additional officer who's on rotation going through. So we're not putting neighbourhood officers in there as a matter of course just for 6 months. It's part of their learning and development that they go in there and then rotate out of that.
Do you not find with that though that you're going to end up with green officers that maybe haven't had the impact of maybe dealing with antisocial behaviour because they're fresh out of Hinden? If it's their first rotation and they're dealt with a group of 15 youths doing canisters and they tell him to bugger off because he's been over there, is he going to have the ability or the training or the knowledge to deal with that? I really worry across the whole borough that we we're building a ticking time bomb by not having the right officers in the right places.
Well, we're obviously working hard, but that's not the case, and everybody's got to learn the job, so we've got to learn one way or another. So what we need to make sure is that they're properly supervised and they're with experienced officers and learning that role. And they shouldn't be going out when they're first straight out of their street duties course on their own to deal with antisocial behaviour. They should be accompanied and learn and develop in that way. That is something which we're conscious of, that we need to make sure that we've got the right people in place to do that. And again, we have to try and develop the supervisors as well to manage those effectively. The neighbourhood model as it is currently, it does make it hard for sergeants because they've got bigger areas to cover than the older safer neighbourhoods model. But we've got some really capable sergeants that are really bringing their staff along really well, and rely on those individuals. So, we're working hard to make sure the right people are in those roles, and that those officers that are new are getting the right development. And again, it's just an ongoing piece of work for us.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. I'm going to my ward panel tomorrow as a resident. I find them quite useful, and they have been. They're good. What happens, what tends to happen, is that there is this distinction between what police does and what the council does, and that really needs to be defined for residents. Because a lot of times we go to ward panel, and Jackie's mentioned it already, is that there's things that come to the council remit which the police don't really get involved in, and that really sort of needs to be defined in terms of ASB. What is a council ASB? What is a police ASB? The question I have initially here is with this table and the pack. I've come into this late, so I'm actually stopping tonight. But the targets, I'm not sure I understand what the targets are, where they've come from, and the way that they are directed as to whether or not they're good or bad. Is the target for reducing the number of reported crimes, even though we know that reported crime in a lot of cases is underreported? I'm not sure what I'm looking at, to be frank, with this. Are these reported crimes? Are they targets? Where we're heading? I'm just not sure what it is we're looking at here. If we get some clarity on that, please.
Can you put your microphone flat?
I'm seeing the figures are around how much we're reducing each year in terms of the numbers on that. So I think it's a 5% reduction each year. So I presume the figure is the number that we're looking to try and reduce that by through those years. Sorry.
Can I make a suggestion here? Because obviously this is your first time on the panel, on the committee, which is great. But I think maybe if you have broader questions about the stats and how they work, maybe a meeting with Jackie to talk about those, and obviously if there's specific issues right now about certain stats, in terms of understanding how they're put together and what they're benchmarked against. Unless if there's a question more focused on that you think can get an answer, but I'm obviously volunteering Jackie now for half an hour time to talk more about in detail about how they're put together. I am partly conscious of time, of course, because normally the meetings should only last 2 hours, even though it's obviously very important stuff we've discussed today. But
okay, thank you. It's just I just wasn't entirely sure which way this was going. It's really is where we've got underreporting of crime, and that's really where I was going with this. It wasn't clear. So just touching back on what was been said previously with youth and working with them and trying to reduce activities, also with different communities within the borough. We have had officers that have immersed themselves deeply with communities, and that seems to have not continued for one reason or another. But also with working with young people, okay, boxing clubs, football, and so on and so forth. Are these things that young people are asking for, or is this just what I'm trying to get at is this something that's sort of being said? Well, that sort of would do that, or is this something that's being asked for by young people? Are they saying, no, we don't have boxing club, let's have a boxing club, or or whatever? Where it's being driven from.
I think some of these are tried and tested ways we've tried to engage with you. So the boxing club been around for a number of years, so that's obviously been a busy and useful way of engaging with the youth. We've got initiatives with Brentford Football Club as well, which again are very popular. I did make the comment yesterday to the deputy lieutenants. Had a meeting yesterday for Ealing, Hounslow and Hillingdon, that maybe some of our activities are too sports focused. Are we really targeting those that aren't interested in sport because we've fell back on the tried and trusted ones? And a football initiative or boxing initiative will always be popular. Hence why we run them. I do think we've got to look at new ways of engaging. I did facilitate a meeting with Kat Wyatt, who leads on the youth services side in terms of how we can better link in with what they're doing. So when they've got their buses going to locations where things like ASB are occurring, how can we get the local teams better linked in with that to have those engagement opportunities? And I think leveraging between ourselves how we can support each other better and make use of each other's opportunities, I think be really important. That's a bit of work which will be ongoing and we can build on. And that includes, so we do our own schools engagements and school packages in secondary and primary schools. And again, particularly with the secondary schools, it's bringing Kat and her team along to those as well, so we can have a bit more of a joined up approach. And just looking, for new ways of engaging with the youth. And that's, again, I had that discussion yesterday, so that's a bit of work we need to take forward, just to continue looking at what young people want to do. So there are other opportunities around music and doing mixing and things like that, which we've not really, I'm not aware that we do those at the moment, but that is of significant interest to young people. So how can we do that? At the moment, I think the funding could be there. We just need someone to drive some of that work. And so youth engagement and how we do that is a definite priority for me in my neighbourhood's role at this moment in time.
Sorry, Jackie, yeah.
Could I just very quickly add something to that? I know Kat, who's the head of service for Youth Justice Access and Adolescent Development and the youth services. She is currently, or her team are currently undertaking a review of what we've got out there at the moment. So who's providing what in relation to youth engagement. So we can have a look to see where there are gaps in services. So that review, prior to putting any more resources into it, is taking place at the moment, just so we can see where we are focusing on at the moment.
I think we'll be very interested to know what that review comes up with. So when it's done, if we could have that presented to us, that would be really good. Thank you. June, is your point related to this matter, or is it on a separate matter?
It's on the same matter.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'll let you go.
Clarification as well. In the awareness of reporting of faith crime and the hate and religious crime, the last meeting we had with the inspector, what was his name? I just forgot his name. He did not give us the statistics or any reporting on that. So now it's turned up here in this paper that there's 146 Q outturned and 668 21 22. So it's saying here there was an increase in awareness of reporting of racist and religious hate crime by 22%. How is that coming out in regards to the public and that? Because it's one of our residents complain that it's not being taken very seriously.
Across Hinden has increased by, hate crime across Hinden has increased by 20%. over that reporting period I talked about earlier. So we do have a faith and hate crime officer that looks at these issues. I think his view on that was slightly positive in the fact that it's partly about encouraging people to come forward to report those crimes when they occur. And some of that element of that increase will be from that increase in reporting. I think, in terms of a general increase, there has been a wider NPS increase around hate crime. And it's something we do need to address. And in terms of that figure, I think things like Brexit and that happening do feed into that as well. But it's just one of those things which we do need to really work hard on. And I think interacting with the community about understanding why that increase has occurred is something we need to really sort of understand a bit better than we do. Because some of that is to do with encouraging people to report it more. But we need to understand where those instances of hate crime are occurring and then address it as well.
Just to follow on, is this information, this stats that's here, is it for Hillingdon only, or is it for the tri-borough wide? Thank you.
Hina.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to go back to youth engagement. I think you mentioned youth scrutiny panels. Can you explain a bit more about what that involves, and also can you explain how you're looking to implement that in Hillingdon?
Yeah, so again, as I said before, really, we implemented it for Ealing together with the Youth Justice Service. So the first session of that took place in March this year, so it's a very new sort of concept. So I think we're still learning in terms of how we run that and how that operates. But ultimately, I think we look to hold those once every 6 to 8 weeks, where we can look at performance around stop and search, look at some of the proportionality issues, how we do stop and search, and get feedback on those. So I think it's a work in development, and I think it's something which we can build on together with yourselves in terms of how that moves forward. But I think for me, it's just giving people the opportunity to see what we do, comment on the figures. What are we doing? How can we do things better? To explain what we do. Why is it that some members of the community are searched more disproportionately to others? Get their perspective on that as well. So I think there's a whole range of issues we can discuss within that, which will actually help us learn and feed back into the officers on the ground. So yeah, I think it'd be a regular meeting with yous where we can just discuss those issues. I think the challenge, and we'll come back to the comments made earlier, is how do we get young people involved with that? And I think that's going to be one of our challenges ultimately, and to get those yous linking in with us regularly around that, I think will be a challenge for us. But I think that's around trying to build on those existing contacts that we've got to try and sort of reassure them that we're trying to do things for the best reasons. But as I say, I think that'll take a bit of time to develop and build on.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for coming tonight to see us. On the youth stuff especially as well, I think in the future more information on that in terms of how it works will be very useful. So I know it's been a long meeting, we've kept you a long time, but really appreciate it. So you're free to leave now if you wish. We've only got one item left, which is our work programme, which I doubt you're going to be that interested in. Okay, so if we go on to our final item, which is the work programme, we had a pretty good discussion about this a couple of meetings ago. But one thing I'd like to propose is that we cancel our meeting in April. It's for two reasons. The first reason is that our statutory duties are going to be fulfilled over email. We've already decided that through Nikki analysing the reports along with us and then providing us with a draft of potential responses to the different health trusts. So we weren't going to be covering that in the meeting as well. And also, to be frank, as we're all aware, we can have other priorities, I think, during that time. So my view is that we cancel April's meeting. Is everyone happy with that? Okay, fantastic. So that means we may or may not see each other in June. Thank you very much, everybody.
Everybody